Captain Lee Hyan floated in the control room of mining station. Prometheus 7 watching the endless dance of asteroids outside his window. The rocks tumbled through space like giant gray dice, each one hiding precious metals that other species were too scared to mine. Most aliens thought the asteroid field was too dangerous, with its shifting gravity wells and unpredictable solar storms, but Hen had been working alone out here for 3 years, and he knew every rock like old friends. His coffee had gone cold again, but he didn't mind. The silence of deep space was better than the crowded noise of human colonies, where everyone wanted to talk about the war with the Valen Empire. Hyan preferred the honest danger of asteroid mining to the politics and fear that filled every conversation back home. Out here he could focus on simple problems like calibrating extraction beams and calculating orbital mechanics instead of worrying about alien invasion fleets. The Valen Empire had been testing human defenses for 5 years, now sending probe ships and small attack forces to see how humans would respond. What they found confused their military planners. Humans didn't fight like other species. When cornered, most aliens would surrender or retreat, but humans seemed to get stronger when things looked hopeless. They turned broken equipment into weapons, found ways to win battles they should have lost, and somehow made their primitive technology work better under pressure. Agent Kiravel studied the intelligence reports about Captain Lee Hyan in her private quarters aboard the stealth ship Dark Wing. Her mission briefing described him as the perfect target, a skilled human operator, working alone, far from military support. The Valen Empire had decided that direct military assault was too costly, so they were trying a new approach: psychological warfare and infiltration. Kira belonged to a special caste of Valen agents trained from childhood in the arts of seduction and manipulation. Her species had evolved advanced empathic abilities that let them read emotions and project irresistible charm. They had used these gifts to conquer dozens of worlds by turning enemy leaders into willing puppets. Humans, she was told, were just another primitive species that would crumble before superior Valen techniques. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Kira would disguise herself as a human trader in distress, crash near Hyan's mining station, and use his species' natural helping instincts to get close to him. Once she gained his trust, she would extract intelligence about human mining operations, defense protocols, and psychological weaknesses that could be used in the larger war. Her handlers expected the mission to take no more than 2 weeks. Kira had spent months preparing for this assignment, studying human language, customs, and behavior patterns. She had undergone surgical modifications to make her appearance perfectly human and practiced human emotional responses until they seemed natural. Her cover identity as Park Soo-jin was complete with fabricated records, family history, and personal details that would satisfy any background check. What made this mission special was not just gathering intelligence, but testing whether Valen manipulation techniques would work on humans. Previous attempts had failed, but military analysts believed this was because the test subjects knew they were dealing with aliens. Kira would be the first agent to approach a human while maintaining perfect cover, giving them clean data about human psychological vulnerabilities. As her ship approached the asteroid field, Kira felt the familiar excitement of beginning a new hunt. She had broken the minds of generals, philosophers, and even other empathic species with her combination of beauty, intelligence, and subtle psychological pressure. Captain Lee Hyan might have a reputation as a tough loner, but he was still just a human male, and she knew exactly how to exploit the weaknesses that came with that biology. The crash was perfectly staged. Kira's ship Dark Wing had been modified to look like a human cargo vessel and equipped with realistic damage that would explain her distress signal. She selected an asteroid close enough to Hyan's station that he would feel obligated to help, but far enough away that rescue would require real effort, making her seem more valuable. When she sent the emergency broadcast, Kira made sure her voice carried just the right mixture of fear and determination. Human males, she had learned, responded strongly to females who seemed brave but vulnerable. She described engine failure, life support problems, and requested immediate assistance while carefully avoiding any technical details that might reveal her true knowledge. Hyan's response came within minutes and surprised her with its practical tone. Instead of rushing to heroic action, he asked specific questions about her ship's condition, her supplies, and her exact location. His voice was calm and professional, showing none of the emotional urgency that her research suggested human males would display when confronted with a female in danger still. This was within acceptable parameters. Humans were known for their caution, and Hyan had survived 3 years in dangerous space by being careful. Kira settled in to wait for rescue while reviewing her psychological profile of the target. He was 32 years old, had served briefly in the human military before becoming a civilian contractor, and had no close family ties that might complicate her mission. 2 hours later, Hyan's rescue ship appeared on her sensors. It was a battered utility vessel that looked like it had been repaired with spare parts and determination, exactly what she expected from human technology. The ship docked with her disabled craft with surprising skill, and Kira prepared to meet her target face to face. When the airlock opened, Kira got her first look at Captain Lee Hyan and felt an unexpected moment of uncertainty. He was not conventionally handsome by human standards, with weathered features and calloused hands that spoke of years doing physical work, but his dark eyes held an intelligence and quiet strength that her empathic senses found difficult to read. Hyan studied her with the same careful attention he might give to a piece of unfamiliar equipment. His expression was polite but guarded, and when he spoke his voice carried no trace of the attraction or protective instincts that should have been triggered by her carefully crafted appearance. "Hello, Park Soo-jin," he said. "I am Lee Hyan. Let's take a look at your ship and see what we can do." As they floated through the damaged cargo vessel, Kira began her subtle assault on his psychology. She projected helplessness, mixed with brave determination, created opportunities for accidental physical contact, and gradually escalated her emotional appeals for his protection. But Hyan seemed immune to techniques that had never failed her before. He examined her ship's damage with professional competence, asked practical questions about her cargo and destination, and offered help in the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. When she mentioned being scared and alone in space, he nodded sympathetically but showed no signs of the emotional engagement she was trying to create. By the time they returned to his mining station, Kira realized that Captain Lee Hyan was going to be a more challenging target than she had expected. His psychological defenses were not what her training had prepared her for, and something about his calm confidence made her own certainties feel less solid than they had that morning. Days stretched into weeks as Kira's ship repairs grew mysteriously complicated every time Hyan seemed close to finishing, another problem would appear requiring more time and more parts that had to be fabricated from scrap metal. Kira told herself she was being thorough, gathering intelligence about human technology and psychology, but the truth was becoming harder to ignore. She was enjoying her time on the mining station. Hyan had given her a small quarters near the main workshop and established a routine that included shared meals and evening conversations. He treated her presence like any other engineering problem, something to be managed efficiently while maintaining appropriate safety margins. His behavior confused her because it matched none of her training about human male responses to attractive females. The mining station itself fascinated Kira in ways she hadn't expected. Human technology was supposed to be primitive compared to Valen science, but Hyan's modifications and improvements showed a kind of creative thinking that her people rarely displayed. He had turned standard mining equipment into precision instruments, jury-rigged life support systems that worked better than the original designs, and created solutions to problems that would puzzle Valen engineers every morning. Hyan would check on her ship repairs, offer breakfast, and begin his daily work routine. He moved through the station with quiet confidence, checking systems, monitoring asteroid movements, and planning extraction operations. His work habits showed the same methodical approach that made him resistant to her psychological techniques. Everything had a purpose and a place in his larger plans. Kira found herself studying Hyan as much as he was studying her, because it became obvious within the first week that he knew she wasn't entirely human. He never confronted her directly, but his knowing looks and gentle humor made it clear that her cover story had holes. He would ask innocent questions about her home colony that revealed gaps in her knowledge, or mention human cultural references that she didn't quite understand. Instead of exposing her deception, Hyan seemed to be conducting his own investigation. He began sharing stories about human history and philosophy, describing the stubborn refusal to surrender that had defined their species since they first looked up at the stars. His tales were entertaining, but Kira realized they were also lessons about human psychology delivered with the patience of a skilled teacher. The psychological warfare between them became a delicate dance that neither acknowledged openly. Kira would deploy her most subtle influence techniques, trying to make Hyan dependent on her presence or create emotional connections that might lead to useful intelligence, but every attempt seemed to slide off him like water off metal, leaving her feeling frustrated and strangely impressed. Hyan would respond to her manipulation attempts with questions that forced her to examine her own motivations. He never accused her of lying, but would ask why certain things mattered to her or what she hoped to accomplish with particular statements. His approach made her think about her mission in ways that her handlers had never encouraged, creating doubts about methods she had used successfully for years. The breakthrough came when Hyan began including her in his daily work routine. He showed her how the mining systems operated, explained the mathematics of orbital mechanics, and taught her to read the subtle signs that indicated which asteroids contained valuable ores. His willingness to share technical knowledge surprised her because military logic suggested he should keep such information secret from a potential spy. Working alongside Hyan revealed aspects of human nature that Valen intelligence had completely missed. Humans didn't just solve problems, they seemed to enjoy the process of finding solutions. They took pride in making broken things work again, in finding new uses for old equipment, and in pushing the boundaries of what their technology could accomplish. Kira began to understand why human military forces were so difficult to defeat in prolonged conflicts. Their approach to warfare wasn't based on overwhelming superiority, but on stubborn persistence and creative adaptation. They treated every setback as a puzzle to be solved rather than a reason to surrender, and they seemed to get stronger when fighting against impossible odds. The dangerous moment came during a solar storm that damaged the station's life support systems. Instead of panicking or demanding that Kira use her advanced technology to save them, Han calmly began working through the problem step by step. He included her as an equal partner in finding solutions, trusting her input while taking responsibility for their survival. As they worked through the night covered in grease and exhaustion, Kira experienced something she had never felt before. During a mission, she wasn't thinking about intelligence gathering or psychological manipulation, but about keeping both of them alive. The work required complete trust and absolute honesty about their capabilities and limitations. Hyan never asked her to reveal her true identity or demanded explanations for her technical knowledge that exceeded her cover story. Instead, he adapted to her abilities as naturally as he adapted to equipment failures or unexpected asteroid movements. His acceptance of her contradictions made her feel safe in ways that Valen culture had never taught her to value. When the repairs were complete and life support systems restored, Kira realized that something fundamental had changed in her thinking. She was no longer observing Hyan as a target to be manipulated, but as a partner who had earned her respect and trust. The shift in perspective was subtle but profound, affecting how she interpreted every interaction between them. The most disturbing change was how she began to see her own species through Hyan's eyes. Valen civilization emphasized perfection, hierarchy, and the efficient use of power to achieve desired outcomes. But human culture seemed to value different things: persistence, creativity, and the ability to form bonds that transcended immediate self-interest. Kira found herself staying close to Hyan as they continued their daily routines, making excuses to help with tasks that didn't require assistance and lingering in conversations that served no intelligence purpose. She told herself she was maintaining her cover, but the truth was simpler and more dangerous. She was beginning to care about him as an individual rather than a mission objective. The realization hit her during a quiet evening meal when Hyan looked directly into her eyes and said something that changed everything between them. "I don't know what planet you're really from, Sujin, but I hope you'll stay until you're ready to tell me the truth." His words carried no threat or demand, just patient acceptance and an invitation to be honest when she felt ready. That night, as Kira lay in her quarters staring at the stars through the small porthole, she faced the truth that her mission had become secondary to feelings she couldn't control or ignore. She was falling in love with the man she had been sent to destroy, and the contradiction threatened to tear apart everything she thought she knew about herself. The solar storm had passed, but the emotional storm inside Kira was just beginning. Her carefully maintained professional distance had crumbled. During those desperate hours when their survival depended on absolute trust and cooperation, she found herself watching Hyan with new eyes, noticing details that had nothing to do with intelligence gathering the way. He hummed quietly while working. How his face relaxed when he smiled and the gentle strength in his hands. Hyan seemed to sense the change. In her attitude, without understanding its cause, he began including her in more personal conversations, sharing memories of his childhood on Earth, describing his dreams for the future and asking about her own hopes and fears. His questions were never invasive, but they invited intimacy in ways that made her defenses feel foolish and unnecessary. The work on her ship had become a transparent excuse for both of them to avoid the inevitable moment when she would have to leave. Every repair led to the discovery of another problem that required attention, and both of them participated in the fiction that these delays were purely technical. Kira knew that Hyan could have fixed her ship in days if he wanted to, but he seemed as reluctant as she was to end their time together. During the long hours they spent working side by side, Kira began to understand why Hyan had chosen the isolated life of an asteroid miner. He wasn't running from human society, but seeking something that crowded places couldn't provide, the freedom to work at his own pace, to solve problems without interference, and to find peace in the vast silence of space. She started sharing her own thoughts about solitude and purpose, careful to frame them in terms of her cover identity, but revealing more of her true self than she had intended. Hyan listened without judgment, asking thoughtful questions that helped her understand her own motivations better. His attention made her feel valued in ways that Valen culture, with its emphasis on hierarchy and competition, had never provided. The dangerous moment came during a routine equipment check when Kira accidentally brushed against Hyan while reaching for a tool. The brief contact sent an electric shock through her system that had nothing to do with static electricity and everything to do with the growing attraction she had been trying to ignore. Hyan's response was equally immediate and unmistakable. Instead of pulling away or making the situation awkward, Hyan simply looked at her with those dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to see through all her pretenses. "I think we both know what's happening here," he said quietly. "The question is what we want to do about it." His directness was typical of his approach to everything else: treat the situation honestly and make decisions based on reality rather than wishful thinking. Kira felt the last of her professional objectivity crumbling as she realized that her feelings were completely reciprocated. Hyan wasn't just tolerating her presence or being politely helpful, he was attracted to her as she was to him. The knowledge should have made her mission easier, but instead it made everything infinitely more complicated. That evening, as they shared dinner in the station's small common area, the conversation turned to deeper topics about loneliness, connection, and the courage required to trust another person. Hyan spoke about his reasons for choosing solitary work, describing how most people disappointed him, not because they were malicious, but because they lacked the persistence to see difficult things through to completion. Kira found herself describing her own experiences with isolation, though she had to be careful not to reveal details that would expose her true identity. She talked about feeling different from others, about the pressure to be perfect, and about the loneliness that came from never being able to show her real self to anyone. The conversation was more honest than any she had ever had with another person. When Hyan reached across the table to take her hand, the gesture was so natural and right that she didn't even think about pulling away. The warmth of his touch seemed to dissolve the last barriers between them, and she realized that the choice she was facing wasn't really about her mission anymore, but about what kind of person she wanted to be. The night that followed changed everything for both of them. Kira made a decision based purely on personal desire rather than professional obligations, and discovered that humans approached intimacy with the same intensity and creativity they brought to everything else. Hyan was gentle but passionate, patient but eager, and completely focused on her pleasure and comfort. What surprised her most was how natural it felt to be close to him without any pretense or manipulation. Their physical connection seemed to unlock emotional depths that she hadn't known existed, and for the first time in her adult life, she experienced the joy of being completely herself with another person. The vulnerability was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. In the aftermath, as they lay together in the station's small quarters, Kira felt the full weight of her betrayal. Crashing down on her, she was an enemy agent who had seduced this remarkable man under false pretenses, gathering intelligence that would be used to destroy his people. But she was also, for the first time in her life, genuinely happy in Complutean's response to their intimacy was everything she should have expected from him and nothing she had been prepared for. Instead of becoming possessive or demanding, he became more attentive to her needs and emotions. He seemed to understand that she was struggling with something larger than their relationship and offered support without requiring explanations. The contradiction between her mission and her feelings became impossible to ignore. She was supposed to be extracting information about human defenses and psychological weaknesses, but every conversation with Heian revealed strengths that made her species look primitive by comparison. Humans didn't just survive through superior technology, they thrived through connections that transcended individual survival. Weeks passed in a haze of shared work, intimate conversations, and growing emotional dependence that went both ways. Kira began to understand that her mission had been based on fundamental misunderstandings about human nature. Her people thought they could manipulate humans through their emotions, but they had failed to recognize that human emotions could also be a source of incredible strength. The situation became more complicated when Kira's Valen physiology began showing unmistakable signs of pregnancy. The possibility had been mentioned in her mission briefings as a potential complication, but the reality was overwhelming. She was carrying the child of a man. She had been sent to destroy a hybrid that represented everything her people considered dangerous about human unpredictability. The knowledge that she was pregnant filled her with emotions she had never experienced before, protective instincts that overrode her training, excitement about the future, and terror about what her handlers would do when they discovered what had happened. Her mission had become a disaster from every possible professional perspective, but she had never felt more certain that she was exactly where she belonged. Kira's pregnancy symptoms were impossible to hide from someone as observant as Heian. The morning sickness, strange food cravings, and emotional swings that came with her changing hormones made her behavior increasingly erratic, more troubling her. Empathic abilities began fluctuating wildly, making it difficult to maintain the careful emotional control that her cover identity required. Heian noticed the changes immediately but approached them with his typical methodical patience. Instead of demanding explanations, he began adapting their daily routines to accommodate her needs, bringing her different foods when she couldn't tolerate the usual meals and taking over tasks that seemed to exhaust her more than they should. The breaking point came during a particularly bad morning when Kira found herself crying over a simple equipment malfunction that normally would have barely registered as an inconvenience. The tears wouldn't stop no matter how hard she tried to regain control, and suddenly she was sobbing out everything: her real identity, her mission, the lies she had told, and the impossible situation she had created. Heian listened quietly as the truth poured out of her. She told him about the Valen Empire, their plans for human conquest, her training as a seduction specialist, and the intelligence she had been sent to gather. She described her species' empathic abilities, their manipulation techniques, and their complete misunderstanding of human psychology. When she finally confessed that she was pregnant with his child and terrified about what that meant for both of them, Heian was silent for several long minutes. The quiet stretched until Kira was certain she had destroyed everything between them, but when he finally spoke, his words shattered every expectation she had about human responses to betrayal. "I figured you were some kind of spy weeks ago," he said calmly. "What I didn't expect was falling in love with you anyway." His acceptance of both her deception and her genuine feelings left her emotionally defenseless in ways that no interrogation technique could have achieved. Ian's practical response was even more devastating to her preconceptions. He immediately began researching everything available about Valen physiology and hybrid pregnancies, using the station's limited database to learn what complications might arise. He converted part of the workshop into a makeshift medical facility and started preparing for health issues that their child might face. The conversation that followed changed both their lives forever. Heian explained that humanity's greatest strength wasn't technology or military might, but their ability to form bonds that transcended tribal loyalties. Throughout history, humans had learned to love their enemies into allies to find common ground with beings who initially wanted to destroy them. Her mission had failed, he pointed out, not because of superior human countermeasures, but because she had encountered something. Her culture couldn't prepare her for unconditional acceptance. Humans didn't just defend themselves against threats, they absorbed them, transformed them, and made them part of something larger and stronger. Kira found herself describing Valen's society in ways she had never articulated before. Through Hyan's patient questions, she realized that her people's emphasis on perfection and hierarchy had created a civilization that was powerful but brittle. They could conquer worlds through superior technology and manipulation, but they couldn't create the unshakable bonds that made humans so dangerous as enemies and so valuable as allies. The Valen approach to relationships was transactional, based on mutual benefit and clear hierarchies, but human love seemed to operate on completely different principles. It was freely given without guarantees of return, and it created obligations that went beyond rational self-interest. The concept was alien to Valen thinking, but Kira was experiencing it firsthand as her pregnancy progressed. Kira discovered emotions and instincts that her culture had never taught her to value. She was genuinely excited about becoming a mother, not because it served any strategic purpose, but because the child growing inside her represented hope for a future she hadn't dared to imagine. Hyan treated the pregnancy as their shared adventure, approaching it with the same careful planning and quiet confidence he brought to everything else. He read medical texts, asked detailed questions about Valen biology, and began making preparations for complications that might arise from their species differences. The most surprising change was how pregnancy affected Kira's empathic abilities. Instead of the controlled precision she had trained for years to develop, her emotional senses became wild and unpredictable. Sometimes she could barely sense anything, other times she was overwhelmed by feelings from both Hyan and the developing child. Hyan helped her understand that this chaos might actually be growth rather than malfunction. He suggested that her rigid training had limited her natural abilities and that pregnancy was allowing her to experience empathy as it was meant to be felt, not as a weapon for manipulation, but as a bridge for genuine connection. They began planning for their child's future, discussing how to raise a hybrid who would inherit abilities from both species. They talked about the challenges their child would face, the advantages of understanding multiple cultures, and the responsibility of being a bridge between two civilizations that had been preparing for war. Kira realized that she wanted their child to grow up with the best qualities of both species, the Valen appreciation for beauty and precision combined with human creativity and stubborn determination. She wanted to teach their daughter or son about empathy as a gift for understanding others, rather than a tool for controlling them. The more they planned and prepared, the more real their future together became. Kira began to see herself not as a failed spy, but as a pioneer exploring possibilities that no one from either species had considered before. Their relationship was proof that cooperation between humans and Valens was not just possible but potentially beneficial for both civilizations. But even as they built their private happiness, Kira knew that the outside world would soon intrude on their isolated paradise. Her handlers would eventually come looking for her, and when they did, she would have to choose between the life she was building with Hyan and the only culture she had ever known. 3 months into her pregnancy, Kira's handler, Commander Dalthren, arrived at the mining station with a small strike team. Her extended silence had been noted, and the Valen Empire demanded either intelligence reports or her immediate extraction. The confrontation that followed revealed just how completely Kira's loyalties had shifted, and how thoroughly Hyan understood the stakes they were facing. Instead of hiding or running, Hyan met the Valen team with calm professionalism. He offered them food, medical attention for their long journey, and respectful acknowledgement of their concerns about their missing agent. His behavior confused and frustrated Dalthren, who had expected either cowering submission or aggressive defiance. Humans, it seemed, had a third option that Valen training had never prepared them for: confident hospitality toward enemies. Kira's pregnancy was immediately obvious to her handler, who demanded immediate termination of both the hybrid fetus and her relationship with the human. The casual cruelty of the order triggered something protective and fierce in Kira that surprised everyone present, including herself. For the first time in her life, she refused a direct order from a superior, placing her hands protectively over her growing belly and stating that she would fight anyone who threatened her child. The standoff that followed demonstrated the profound changes in Kira's thinking. She argued passionately that her time with Hyan had revealed critical flaws in Valen understanding of human capabilities. Their species wasn't just technologically primitive, they were operating on completely different principles that made them far more dangerous than anyone had realized. The intelligence she had gathered suggested that direct confrontation with humanity would result in Valen defeat, not because of superior weapons, but because humans fought with a unity and determination that Valen forces couldn't match. Hyan's intervention transformed the situation from a confrontation into a negotiation. He offered Dalthren something unprecedented, a formal invitation for Valen diplomats to establish peaceful contact with human authorities. Instead of the intelligence coup they had hoped for, he was offering them something potentially more valuable, a path to coexistence that didn't require the massive casualties that military conquest would inevitably entail. The proposal created chaos in Valen command structure. No human had ever offered voluntary cooperation before, and their protocols had no framework for dealing with enemies who extended genuine friendship. Dalthren found himself forced to contact his superiors for guidance, buying time for Kira and Hyan to present their case for a different kind of future between their species. 6 months after the confrontation with Dalthren, Kira gave birth to a healthy daughter in the advanced medical facility on New Geneva, humanity's diplomatic headquarters. The baby arrived surrounded by doctors from both species working together. To ensure her safe delivery, Leah So Young became the first human Valen hybrid in recorded history, and her birth was broadcast across both civilizations as a symbol of hope. So Young inherited her mother's empathic abilities and her father's stubborn determination, creating a combination that fascinated scientists from both species. More importantly, she became living proof that cooperation between humans and Valens was not just possible but could create something beautiful and new. Her very existence challenged the assumptions that had driven both civilizations toward war. The diplomatic process that followed Kira's confession had been slow and complicated, requiring months of careful negotiation as both sides learned to communicate. Across vast cultural differences, Dalthren had eventually chosen to support the peace initiative, but only after his superiors recognized that military conquest of humanity would cost more than any possible victory could be worth. Kira found herself at the center of historic changes as her insights into both cultures made her invaluable as a translator and cultural bridge. She worked alongside human diplomats to establish protocols for peaceful contact, trade agreements, and mutual defense. The work was challenging and sometimes frustrating, but it gave her a sense of purpose that spying had never provided. Hyan adapted to fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything else. He proved remarkably skilled at understanding So Young's hybrid nature, treating her empathic episodes as natural developments rather than problems to be solved. His patient approach to parenting helped Kira break free from Valen cultural patterns that emphasized control over growth. Their daughter displayed extraordinary abilities from an early age. She could sense emotions from both parents simultaneously, creating a family bond that was deeper than either parent had thought possible. So Young seemed to understand intuitively that she was special not because she was better than others, but because she could help people understand each other. The family's home on New Geneva became an informal embassy where humans and Valens could meet in a relaxed environment free from the tensions of formal diplomacy. So Young's presence helped both species see each other as individuals rather than abstract threats or allies. Her innocent questions often revealed assumptions that adults had never examined as diplomatic contact. Expanded other interspecies relationships began to develop, inspired by Kira and Hyan's example. Trade delegations included cultural exchanges. Military cooperation replaced preparation for conquest, and joint research projects explored how different approaches to science and technology could benefit both civilizations. Kira discovered that pregnancy had permanently changed her empathic abilities in ways that made her more effective as a diplomat. Instead of the precise control she had once prized, she now experienced emotions as flowing connections that revealed deeper truths about people's motivations and fears. The change made manipulation impossible, but understanding much easier so. Young grew into a remarkable child who displayed intelligence, creativity, and emotional maturity beyond her years. She seemed to instinctively understand the importance of her role as a bridge between cultures, taking pride in her mixed heritage, while remaining humble about her unique abilities. Her presence in any room made both humans and Valens more willing to find common ground. The success of the peace process led to expansion of diplomatic contact beyond the original military concerns. Cultural exchanges brought Valen artists to human worlds, while human engineers helped improve Valen technology. Joint exploration missions discovered new worlds that both species could share, and mutual defense agreements protected smaller civilizations from aggressive neighbors. Kira often reflected on how completely her life had changed from the woman who had crashed near Hyun's mining station. She had begun her mission believing that humans were just another species to be conquered and controlled. Instead, she had discovered that humanity's greatest weapon was their capacity to transform enemies into family. The transformation had not been easy, and there were still members of both species who opposed the peace process. Some Valens viewed her as a traitor who had betrayed her people for personal gain, while some humans questioned whether aliens could ever be truly trusted. The criticism hurt, but it also strengthened her resolve to prove that cooperation was possible. Hyun continued his work as a mining engineer, but now led joint human-Valen teams that extracted resources more efficiently than either species could achieve alone. His natural leadership abilities and patient teaching style made him popular with workers from both cultures who appreciated his focus on practical results over political posturing. Their marriage had been a major diplomatic event attended by representatives from both governments and broadcast across multiple star systems. So Young's role as Flower Girl had charmed audiences on dozens of worlds, proving that the next generation might grow up seeing interspecies cooperation as natural rather than remarkable. As so Young approached her third birthday, she began showing signs of abilities that neither parent fully understood. She could sense emotions across greater distances than typical Valens, could communicate telepathically with certain individuals, and seemed to have an intuitive grasp of complex social dynamics that impressed adult diplomats. The family faced challenges that no one had prepared them for. Raising a child who was literally unique in the universe required constant adaptation and creative solutions. So Young needed specialized education that incorporated both human and Valen approaches to learning while preparing her for a role that had no historical precedent. Despite the difficulties, Kira had never been happier or more certain that she was exactly where she belonged. Her attempt to break Hyun with her charm had resulted in both of them becoming something entirely new, pioneers in a future where differences between species could become sources of strength rather than reasons for conflict. Looking toward the future, Kira saw endless possibilities for growth and discovery. Their daughter represented just the beginning of what human-Valen cooperation could achieve, and every day brought new evidence that the universe was large enough for both species to thrive together rather than fight for dominance over each other.